new library that meets the current and future needs of the community. That was passed in June 2010. At the same time, the library committee was formed. Now we should look at the Atherton Library Service Area because it's key to the population base that they use for determining the size of the library. It includes the Atherton, and these numbers are based on the 2000 census. Atherton population of 7,000 some, county population of 13,006. And the county population is in the Sequoia Tract, in Menlo Oaks, West Menlo Park, and Weekend Acres, which is out past Sharon Heights. So the county population is about twice the Atherton population, and the total at that time was 20,860. The Sequoia Tract is the only county section closer to Atherton's library than the Menlo Park's library. Does the Atherton Library really serve 20,860 people? It's the basis, or the basis of new library size is their needs assessment, what they call benchmarking. They compared the Atherton Library to 6 peer libraries in the city shown there. Most of them, the only one nearby is Redwood Shores. Some of them as far away as Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Pinecrest, Florida. It considered 6 categories of space: collections, reader seating, computers, program room, children's area, and group setting. And it compared library space parameters on all of these categories of space, primarily per capita ratios based on their service area population. And these comparisons you can't read, but they're in the handout. The bottom line here was, it came out, the needs assessment report recommended in Atherton that there should be 0.70 square feet of building space per capita. So that 0.70 is important, and the per capita number is important, because you multiply the two together and you get the library space. The way they did it. So peer library total square feet per capita range from 0.6 to 1.47, an average of 0.91 square feet per capita. The Atherton Library currently has 0.29 square feet per capita, and a service population claimed to be 16,436. The needs assessment report recommends minimum of 0.7 square feet per capita. So compared to benchmarking peers, Atherton's size is deficient by 59%, which implies that the site should be 11,683 square feet. So here's how you get the space needed. You take the recommended Atherton Library space of 0.70 square feet per capita, and an Atherton service area population of 16,436. You multiply the two together and you get 11,505 square feet. And the needs assessment recommends approximately 11,100 square feet. How realistic is the 16,000 some service area population? Should the service area population be based on actual library users, primarily people who check out items? Aren't library card holders' addresses available in library records? Can't we analyze how many checkouts there are by Atherton versus non-Atherton residents, and without rocket science get a better number for population served? Now here's an attempt to get another approach to library service area. Took the areas served, Atherton and different county areas, their population, their distance to the Atherton Library, and their distance to the Menlo Park Library, and the estimated Atherton Library use, which I pulled out of the air just like the 7/10 seem to come out of the air. So you multiply the percentage use by the population, and you get an estimate of the population served. So you add these all up and you get a total of about 10,723 populations served instead of the 16,000 some that was used. Another alternative for doing this is just to consider a different basis for the numbers. The Atherton 2010 census is 6,914. That would result in library square footage of 4,800 square feet, less than the present library. If you take the Atherton Library card holders, they're 8,443, which would give library square footage of 5,910. And then you take the realistic adjusted from the previous slide of 10,773, and that gives you a library square footage of 7,541. Down at the bottom, the needs assessment service area was 16,000. I just picked an in-between number of 13,000, and that gives library square footage of 9,100. All of these compared to 11,505 recommended. So again, I'm just trying to figure, is this a new one or maybe I guess a new one? Based on the estimated service area population of 10,723, instead of 16,000, library space equals 0.7 times 10,723 for 7,506 square feet. Instead of 11,100 or 56% more than the 4,790 existing square feet. And this is without considering the impact of ebooks. It's not a recommendation, only an indication that more study is needed. Here's the existing Atherton Library with the spaces allocated to different activities or functions. Total square footage, 4,790. Here's what the needs assessment came up with for increases in the existing space category. It said that collection items should increase from 33,000 to 51,000 some, an increase of 18,700 or 57%. Collection square footage would go from 1,220 to 4,200. 2980 increase, which is a 344% increase. Now the reason for that, I'm told, is that instead of having books stored on the shelves with the binding out, you should store them face out so that you can see what they are. And therefore that takes up 6 times as much space per book as the present method of storage. And I suggest that, sure, some books should be stored face out, and they're done that way now. But it looks as though this number is based on all of them being stored that way. You could correct me. I'm just guessing from what I read, because it is stated as to how it was done. Reader seats would go from 28 to 68, an increase of 142%. The seat square footage would go up 98%. Computer square footage would go up 242%. Remember that in my grandchildren's St. Andrew's School, they eliminated the computer lab when they got their iPads. Whether everyone in Atherton and the neighboring city will end up with iPads, I don't know. But maybe computer square footage won't grow as much as they think. The staff square footage drops. It's the only category that does drop, and the main reason for that is the attic. the second floor, which the study said is not quality usable space. So the total increase in square footage for existing categories of service is 116%. Then the needs assessment also said that there should be space for new categories. So we start out with the existing space from the previous table of 3884 square feet. And the new category should include a quiet zone, a gathering place, friends of the library, marketplace, and I'm not sure what that is, and a group study. And there's 2,426 feet for that. It's not allocated. And the way it was determined was to subtract the total square feet needed for existing functions from the 11,100 square feet in total, and what was left over, it said, should be allocated among these functions. So the total increase is 6,310 square feet, 127%. Now here's the site alternatives. These were already shown, so I kind of rushed through the existing library and the Holbrook Palmer Park Library, or the Holbrook Palmer Park site. This is the Site A building location, which is not recommended, and it would be the long, narrow building as shown there, sometimes referred to as bowling alley. And the main part of the building that's shown there is down to this point. That's the 9,800 square feet. And this area out here in the reading garden, the red dotted lines, brings it up to 11,100 square feet. And it shows that there's shared parking and there's plenty of parking space available. The recommended Site B location is in the park. This shows a view of the entire park and the library pretty much at the center of the entire park. You can compare its size to the pavilion. I assume that that size is supposed to represent 11,100 square feet. Maybe it doesn't, but it looks a little big. And you'll notice there are a number of other buildings around the park, many of which might be considered as alternative locations if the square footage required isn't so much. This is just a closer view of the proposed main library and its site. Now, there's another Site A option, and if you go back to the Site A drawing and look at the my red light went out. Okay, we look at the shape of the dotted lines. That's the existing library. The rectangle in red that's around it is bounded by the extremities of the existing library and shows that it would be placed pretty much where the existing library is, would require demolition, complete demolition of the existing library, and could not utilize the area to the right of the library, which the long, thin bowling alley would. Now, taking another look at this location, the building footprint is 8,600 square feet. The front setback is 4,000 square feet, which is based on, I think, a 35-foot setback. And as I understand it from Phil Lively, the front setback required is whatever the council decides it should be. Anything from probably 0 to what it is. So there's an extra 4,000 square feet there, part of which could be tapped if you wanted to build a larger library than 8,600 square feet. There's also that little wedge at the bottom of 850 square feet that could be added if you wanted to have the building of a slightly irregular shape. So in total, you've got about 13,000 square foot potential almost on the existing library building site. So recommendations are first determine the size, then the location. The needs assessment should be updated. We should add e-books impact considerations. We should reevaluate the basis of service area population. We should determine the library features wanted, probably with a comprehensive user survey, and in turn then use all of this information to develop the total square feet and major allocations. And then the council, San Mateo County Library, should approve the features and the space. And only then should we start thinking about location and develop alternative conceptual plans and their costs, considering the park location, the existing and its options, the existing library area location and its options, other locations, the town center integration, and an independent consultant architect should be engaged for each plan, each alternative, so that there's competition, not one person determining all the alternatives and how to select the best one. That would be followed by a town-wide or user-wide referendum on choices and a final decision. Now, what if the available funds exceed the library costs? You should start thinking outside the box. That was a birthday card from my daughter on my recent birthday. The inside of it says, "Hope you're not too pooped to celebrate your birthday." So think outside the box. How about iPads for public schools? Or other things outside the box? So that's it.
Thank you, Jack, very much.
Thank you very much.
Any questions?
Any questions from, we'll start with Bob again, if you don't mind?
No, it's very good. Thank you.
I thought it was very good too.
I enjoyed it. My daughter lives in the West Menlo area and pays property taxes that, you know, help support the library, and she does use the library, and most of their neighbors and most of their friends do.
Okay,
So I don't know where you got your statistics here, but I know Los Lomitas does use a lot of the library, and they do contribute very
Well,
much to the library.
I think there are Atherton people that use the Menlo Park Library and the Atherton Library,
Sure there
and vice versa. But I think the point is, I'm not suggesting that these numbers are the right numbers. I'm suggesting we ought to do a little more study to find out what the numbers really are and what our service population is, where the users come from, where they live. and
Yeah,
so
I don't know that we can restrict it to Athertonians, and I don't think we have the right to do that anyway.
No, that's not the point.
Right. Now, the size, I think that is something that we've heard continually, that we might have to reconsider the size. I don't think that's being determined now at all anyway. So that I think, because they're including a lot of other public use rooms in the kind of the deal, but I think that's, you know, a different category. But
My only comment is that I happened to even talk to a couple startup companies tonight that actually use the Menlo Park Library as their headquarters for their company. They actually go there and they will access the free wireless, and they're running code, and they're building a company from the library. They're using the library basically as a community center, and that's what they're doing. And I think that's a big area of and by the way, my cousin also raised millions of dollars to do a library at the Port of Lane. And they actually had to make design changes because there's not that many people checking out books as there are people. They had to do a bigger open space in order to do for people bringing their laptops, their iPads, and that kind of thing. And it's turned into a community center, and it does get used a lot. So I think that the concept here is good as a community center. There's going to be a debate whether it should be here or elsewhere, but I think that a lot of people should really stop using it as a library or saying it's a library rather than a community center, because that's really what it is going to be used for. And that's what we need to think about, in my opinion.
Diane?
My only comment, I think, is the needs assessment, and I think that the library as a body governed on their own has a formula based on the service area. Whether or not they use the library, you still have to include them in your numbers because it's available to them as a resource available. And so their formula that they came up with is based on something. I don't think they didn't just invent it just for this particular library. It's something that has been developed through the county level, throughout the state. I think it has some validity.
I have no great presentation, good humor, thank you. But I do echo David's Wright's comment is that I think it will be considered greatly a community center. This time, if there's no more questions from the commissioners, I will open it to public comment. Go ahead.
Yes, Jack, I really enjoyed that, and I think the humor you added to it gave a lot of pleasure to it. But I'm missing the connection between the Park and Rec and what they're designed to do and what you're presenting.
I'm making no attempt to
This is something you can practice on.
talk about where the park should be. I wouldn't want to get in the middle of that debate because it's too subjective, too emotional, and whoever decides that is going to be in a no-win situation.
Maybe I'll rephrase the question. Where's the relevance of your presentation in the scope of the task of Park and Rec?
I think
I enjoyed it, by the way.
in terms of size of the library, I think it suggests some possible areas of the park other than this building if the size were to be determined to be significantly less. After determining what the library is supposed to do, what we want it to do, and what we think the future is going to be, particularly ebooks. You know, ebooks are growing exponentially. Right now, the county system has, I think, about 12,000 ebooks available, which is minor compared to its 600,000 printed books or printed items, which includes music and DVDs. But I think that 6,000 is going to grow tremendously. I'm not suggesting that ebooks will replace printed books, but I think they may reduce the number of printed books that a library needs to shelve because the ebooks will be so readily accessible. Some types of reference books you wouldn't want to use on a Kindle, but there are other personal reading, fiction. I think on fiction there's a big market for ebooks.
I'd just like to make a comment about the focus on the needs assessment. Part of the work that we've done over the last few months is to work with the library staff and our library consultant, Kathy Page, in assessing the needs assessment, looking at best practices, holding focus groups, and really working on what the program for the library would be. And in doing that, we looked at a range of sizes, and some of the things that were looked at was some of the assumptions and the work done in the needs assessment. It is a couple of years old, and looking at the collection needs, that to some degree was reduced. The way books are stored, some would be sort of lined out, some would be open. Types of books, the influence of ebooks. The computers were actually essentially eliminated with the idea that laptops would be checked out within the library, and so a dedicated computer area is not in the existing model. And the preliminary library program that we have is on our website and in the appendix, and we will continue to work through what the library program will be as we work through the design of the building, and the community will be an integral part of that process. And I just wanted to reiterate that bit of information. And the presentation was great, and thank you very much, Jack.
And I want you to understand that I'm not intended to be critical of anything. I'm
No, I
just
understand.
presenting
Really
what I
trust
see.
us.
I have no choice as to where it should be. I'm just saying that until we know how big it should be, we shouldn't worry too much about where it should be.
We're at a point where we think we have sort of an idea. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Well, I'd just like to say that the information that Jack presented, just by comparison with the other information that was presented in the report that several people supported this evening, sort of shows a significant difference in what the needs assessment is, and I think we should follow his advice, and also the lady who was on the rail committee, and put a pause on this until the community really feels consulted, because I think 1% of the African population, as I said, people are just waking up to the fact that this is happening, and there's a lot of emotion, and I just think it's too early. And I also do think we received a very biased report. You know, just look at almost 500, you know, the space difference, you know, over a third in what the service population is. The numbers don't lie. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, at this time I'm going to close public comment and bring it back to the commissioners. I too have concerns, and I'll be open with you about those. I have not chosen a location in my mind. I've tried to be very open about all and listen to everyone. What I do know, and I think we all know, who have lived in this area for any length of time, open space has been lost to us in great chunks. I've lived here over 50 years in many areas. Before 280, before I think Sandy Crittenden and I about the same time. So we've seen a lot of changes. Once we lose open space, we do not get it back. It's gone. Once you put it in bricks and mortar, it is gone. So we must consider our size, location. Open space is a precious commodity in any place, in any city. I'm concerned about traffic. I'm concerned about size. I'm concerned about the impact in the park because of who dictates. Once the library's in the park, who calls the shots? If the other community, other organizations want to use things in the park, who calls it? They're the largest, would be the largest entity in the park. We have a foundation, we have other organizations, ACIL, the Dames, and other groups that use this park, besides Little League Tennis and everyone else. So if those organizations haven't been, who calls? I don't know, hasn't been decided. The other thing is traffic, I mentioned earlier. Excuse me while I reference my notes. Your report, the library's report, defines several areas that the library fund can only be used for certain expenses. It hints at possibly paying some of the cost of common areas, roads, paths, parking areas, and grounds. I'd like to know before we make a commitment to a place in the park by the JPB, what those capital improvements would be and what they'll cover. It's only been indicated and hinted. We have no dollars, we have nothing. I don't know that. At this time, a lot of our facilities are being worked on, outsourced. It's been hinted that they'll cover some of the maintenance. What is that? Is there capital improvements? Will you replace my fences? Will, you know, how much area you're going to get? And I think we need to ask that of the Joint Powers Board. We need a commitment from them, I feel, before we go further. I'm concerned about traffic. I'm concerned about an emergency in this park. If there's a fire, there's one way in and one way out. Is it a concern? Is it a safety issue? I don't know. I think it's a firework issue. So those are just a few of my concerns. I'm very concerned about size. I'm concerned there's been issues. We've had graffiti in our park. There's been issues at the library. There is a police report that's out there. There's been calls from the library. There's times, the library's hours are much different than our park hours. We open at sunrise and we close at sunset. How do those change with library hours? I think your library's open until 9 o'clock. I'm not sure. So I'd like to know who dictates. Who dictates? If the library comes into this park, who calls? If there's an 800, 900 Easter egg hunt people, who calls? Who gets first priority? Who determines that? Who's the overseer of those scheduling? So, I don't know if staff has any report of any kind. At my suggestion at this time, and I think there's some people, is we're putting we should determine the size. I think a full EIR should be done on this project before we determine the location. That is my recommendation, and I will take comment by any commissioners.
Well, I know I did ask the question earlier when they were here as far as how much control were they going to try and have over the park. At that point, they indicated that they would be only interested in the park, but they did not indicate, again, how much of the landscaping or any of the improvement, would be covered. But I know that that was a concern that was given to me as far as who would be controlling. And they indicated they would be hands-off on it. I do agree that the in and out in the traffic, the speed at which people travel back and forth is a concern. I do think that, I did some surveying today myself, walking around, getting wet on, because I'd heard a lot of the people that were very much against the park. It was interesting, as I walked around the park, most people I think had talked about it a lot, and I got almost all people more interested in having it here in the park than not. I decided to get in my car and go on the other side, and came across some, didn't even know we had a library, by the way. And it ended up there was probably 19 people, because this is very unscientific and everything else. But the comments of people on the other side is that, well, I've written letters, I don't know that they make any difference. A lot of people are very strong in their voice, and I'm not going to stand up in front and, battle them. There was 19 that indicated they wanted it in the park, and 7 or 8 that, did not. We've heard total reverse here tonight. And the first one we met, it was like 3-1, and I think some of that has changed, that 3 wanted it from the first presentation in here, and then it has changed a little bit, I think. I don't know. I think there is a big question as to what the people would say and who would win. I, got very wet trying to find out. That's all I'm gonna say.
Well, I will tell you that I did also go down my street, and there's actually a petition on our street to keep the library out of the park. And they've actually asked me to sign it. I said, I can't do it. And I'm independent about it. But I can tell you that the flavor on my street, which is just two over, is dead set against it.
And that's it, I don't
So,
know, I don't know what the
I think it varies depending on who you talk to and all that. I can tell you that my kids have not been in the library for over 6 years. Maybe.
And how old are your children?
They're almost 15 and 13 now. They do all the research on the computers now. Now, granted, we can afford to have computers and things like that, and the library is great for people who can't afford that kind of thing and all that. So I understand the need to have a library community center. I'm just not convinced that in the park is the best place at this point. But I do like the idea of having a library community center in Atherton to kind of bring families together. I am really excited about that.
Okay. So, I'm gonna attempt to, anybody wanna make a recommendation? or-
What's what are we supposed to do?
Our, we are a advisory to the council. So what we would advise the council at this point is what we decide. We can decide to say that until there is further study or survey by the community, that we see, or a full EIR on both sites or at other sites in the town, that we suggest that they do more study. As which,
Except I think that we were charged with the responsibility to select, to make a recommendation to the council for either A or B.
no,
No, I don't understand how we could have that authority. We have authority.
We can only